And here we go. So this is just gonna take a little bit of time. But how is everybody doing today? It's raining here in Victoria, British Columbia. Hey, Alan. Just give me a second here as we get everybody on the screen who wants to. And if you don't join in now, just at any time during this chat, if you want to say something, just raise your hand and hopefully I will notice that you did so, and then I will promote you to be a panelist. There is a chat as well. So on my screen, there's a little button on the very bottom that says chat, and that opens up a chat bar on the side. I see Kevin says awesome. And so if you're in the chat, there's a little option, like a drop-down box, that you can chat to the panelists, which are all the people on the screen, or you can chat to all panelists and attendees. So if you want to just make sure that you're chatting to all panelists and attendees, then everybody will be able to see what you're saying. You can also send messages directly to individuals if you like. But yeah, I think I've got everyone with their hand raised. So good morning. So all of your speakers are off, and so on your screen there should be a little unmute button up in the top corner, and that will unmute you so that you can talk to me. And you can also just press the space bar, which will unmute you as you're holding the space bar down, and then as you release it, it mutes you again. So sometimes there can be, if there's background noise or something, it's easier to just mute everybody while there's a conversation happening, and then when you want to talk, then you can unmute yourself. So I think I have everyone with their hand raised has been unmuted. So if you are just joining and you want to participate in the chat, then please raise your hand and I will promote you to be a panelist, and then you can turn your video on, and then we can chat. So I think I've got everyone. So good morning. It's so nice to see all of you. And I see, so there is a little Q&A box as well. I see someone has asked a question in the Q&A about barium, so I will get to that. So you can, if you're not on video, or even if you are on video, you can use the chat, or you can use the question and answer box. I believe if you're a panelist, then you can't ask a question with the Q&A box, but you could just type it in the chat on the side. And then, sorry, I'm just gonna see someone raising their hand. Okay. So if you raise your hand later on and I don't see it, just type a message and get my attention somehow, and I'll promote you to be a panelist. So welcome everyone, wherever you are in the world. If you're in the chat, maybe you can say hello and let us know where you are from. Renu here from India. Yeah, it's nice to just see where everyone is coming to us live from. So I see a couple questions coming in, so I might just get started with those. And then as we go on, just feel free to chime in. You can unmute yourself. Hopefully, can someone just test that they are able to unmute themselves? Just because a couple on
Alan?
Yeah.
I just unmuted.
Perfect. Yeah, 2 chats ago, no one was able to unmute themselves, so I had to do it. So that's great.
May I ask the first question?
Okay, yes, you can.
I wasn't able to listen or get in on your other ones. I had a question before about ash glazes. Did you answer those on one of those other two sessions that you've had?
No, I haven't talked about ash glazes yet.
Okay.
So yeah, go ahead and yeah, ask your question. I remember.
Well, I have trouble with, you know, I like the specific gravity of this. My normal glazes work fine, but when I tried to do specific gravity with my ash glazes, they went bonkers. It's like I didn't want to mess them up, you know. I didn't want to get them too thin. And I know when you screen, when I screen and thin them out, then they don't do what they can do. They're pretty. So I just wondered if there was any insight anywhere with ash glazes over. I put ash glazes over my other glazes. So
okay.
Anyway,
and yeah. And so when you say ash glazes, you're talking about wood ash, like from the fireplace, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have burned places. I have some ash that's still from where I lived in Alabama.
Yeah.
I have some ash that I get from my back porch when I burn oak and pine with some nails in it, so I get some iron running in it. It's
yeah.
pretty. So I just have trouble with it overlaying it, and I know I'm probably putting it on too thick at the rim, and you've already talked about that, but I just wanted to know about specific gravity, if that can actually be done with ash glazes the way you talk about it.
Yeah, so I don't have a lot of experience with ash glazes myself. The only thing I've ever done is I've like sprinkled wood ash onto a chino after glazing. So I just kind of like sprinkle the ash on top of the glaze. But if I could take a guess, so ashes to me seem like they would have a low density, like they're quite light and fluffy. And so I would expect that they would make the glaze much thicker than a regular glaze, and that you might need to have more water, so have a lower specific gravity to get the glaze functioning, you know, so it's not too thick. Like, has that been your experience where the glaze is just really thick?
It is really thick, and I tried washing ash glaze, and it washes out a lot of the color, so I just sieve it at 60, and then I just put it into an ash base that I use. It's 50, 25, 25, and then I don't wash it, and I just make sure that I stir it really good and then dip it in. I tried sprinkling it on, and it didn't, and I thought it was on too thick, but it didn't give me the effect that my other ones did, running and looking just variegated and very pretty. So
yeah.
I don't want to, you know, ash glaze is very, once you run out of ash, then you start it again, you actually get a brand new glaze.
A new composition.
I like what I've got. I don't really want to lose some by testing it like that, but I guess that's what I should be doing, is testing it. So
yeah.
anyway.
And have you tried deflocculating? Like, I'm pretty sure ashes are high in like calcium and the RO flux, which are the flocculants. And I wonder if deflocculating would help to thin it down. So like with a material, I'm thinking of a magnesium carbonate, which is like a really light and fluffy material, which I do have a lot of experience with in lichen glazes. And so I know that my glazes that are really high in magnesium carbonate, my specific gravity is down around 1.3, because if it's any higher, meaning, so when your specific gravity is higher, it means your glaze has less water in it. So if it's any higher, then the glaze just doesn't function. It just like cracks and falls right off the pot before I even get it into the kiln. And so I've used a combination of deflocculating as well as adding a little more water and keeping the specific gravity on the lower side. And so there's probably a balance that you're going to have to find between, because were you saying when it's thicker, it looks better, and like you like how it looks better when it's thicker? Like, are you having troubles with it crawling? Like,
Yes.
what are the issues?
Inside the rim, it crawls away, and that's why I know I'm probably putting, my rims are probably too thin, and I'm probably putting the glaze on too thick. What I'm trying to do right now is when I lay down my base glaze, is let it sit for a day and dry more completely, because I like what you said about the water retaining inside, and that's probably what's causing pinholes and the inability for the ash glaze. So I'm trying to peel off more around with my fingers and get it thinner before I actually put the ash on it. I'm going to try that and see what happens. I just was curious if anybody else had any experience with that. I'm not the only one using ash, am I?
No, certainly not. And if anyone does have experience, please feel free to chime in here. Just looking at the chat, someone else Hannah has a question about ash glazes. But yeah, Alan, have you tried deflocculating with Darvan?
Yes, I did. And from your original glaze class, I'm tempted not to over deflocculate.
Yeah.
So I put in what I thought was a pretty good quantity, and it freaked me out, so I stopped. It didn't do anything.
Right.
So what's interesting about this, when I took a spray bottle and I sprayed the inside, and it just of a previously dipped pot, and it was really high in oxides. It was a brown black glazed, and it cracked, and I thought, oh my God, it's not going to work at all. But when it came out of the kiln, it was perfect, except for a little running around the edge where it peeled away. But it was just stunning, and I'm thinking, okay, because it just all melted together with the cracks, and it didn't seem to matter because it was an overlay. So
right.
I just don't want to lose this glaze. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
But I tried. I'm going to try like you suggest. I'm going to pull some of it out, and then I'm going to thin it down and just see. But the other question that I had was about, which may lead into this, is what do I want to say? There was some glazes that already had the deflocculants in it. You said something about this before, and I wanted a list of those chemicals that were naturally deflocculated, so that I could look at my glazes and see, like you're saying here, you're saying that my ash glaze may be naturally deflocculated. Is that from the ash or from the other?
It may be naturally flocculated from the ash, is what I'm assuming. But,
so that's why it gets thicker too.
Yeah. And so what I would suggest is take out a very small sample, like even just a few tablespoons of your glaze, and try to deflocculate that. And because then if you ruin it, then it's no big deal. You've just taken a very small amount. But because you said you tried adding, was it Darvan that you were using as a deflocculant?
Yes, I have Darvan. I have the other, I forget what it is now, the other chemical that's even heavier duty, but Darvan seems to work on all my glazes when I need to deflock them.
Yeah, and so then, just see if you can get that little small sample to thin down with Darvan, and then you'll kind of know that, okay, maybe you just didn't add quite enough because you're being cautious. But yeah, if you try just with a really small amount, you're going to be able to see whether the Darvan will have an effect, and then you won't have to mess with your whole batch.
Okay.
And
all right, great. Thank you.
And your other question was
somebody else. Thank you, Jen.
Okay. But you had mentioned that some of the materials are naturally deflocculating, and those are like sodium is a natural, is the deflocculating ingredient in Darvan. And sodium silicate is also a deflocculant. And so our materials, a lot of our materials have some solubility, like just naturally. And so materials that are high in sodium are more likely to have a deflocculating effect on the glaze composition. And so that's what I was saying, like in my course. So materials like Minspar is a soda feldspar. So any sodium feldspar, Nefsi, a lot of the frits are sodium based. And so if you have glazes that are high in sodium in general, and you can use glazy.org to look at the composition and see the UMF breakdown. And if it's really high in sodium, then there's a good chance that it might be naturally deflocculated, and those are the glazes that often need to be flocculated.
What do you consider high?
I don't.
10%?
No, higher than that. And I don't really have a value. Like I generally just look at a recipe, and I tend to look at the UMF rather than the material percentages. And so sodium is the primary flux, or the R2O flux. And so the choices for an R2O flux are sodium, potassium, and lithium. And so if all of the R2O flux is sodium, then I would say there's a pretty good chance that your glaze will need to be flocculated.
Okay.
But I don't just decide based on the formula. I always just decide based on, after measuring specific gravity, if it's really thin in the bucket, then I'm gonna flocculate. So you don't actually need to know what's in your glaze to know if it needs to be flocculated. It's kind of like if you go through the process where you measure the specific gravity, get it to what you've determined is the value that works best, and then at that point you decide whether it's too thick or too thin, and then if it's too thin you would flocculate, if it's too thick you would deflocculate. And so just knowing what's in your materials can help you. Like I just can look at a recipe and say, oh, it's likely that recipe is going to need to be flocculated, but I never know for sure until I'm actually like stirring the bucket. So
thank you.
You're welcome. I was just gonna look in the chat here. There was another question about ash glazes from Hannah. My ash glaze is very thick when I made it in a large amount. Magnesium carbonate pure in another form. Okay, so when I was talking about magnesium carbonate, I was just talking about another material that is really light and fluffy. So magnesium carbonate is this light and fluffy material that makes your glazes really thick in the bucket. And so I was saying that the ash could be similar to magnesium carbonate in the way that it changes kind of the way the glaze behaves in the bucket. And then deflocculating, I deflocculate with Darvan. Dolopix, I'm not familiar with Dolopix. And so if you're, like I'm in Canada, and so if you're in another part of the world, like if you're in Europe, then there might be something different that people are using to deflocculate. And I am not familiar with what people are using, but I do know that Darvan is sodium polymethacrylate. So that's the chemical name for Darvan. And so if you can find another material that it could be a different brand, like Darvan is just a brand name of a substance, and the substance is sodium polymethacrylate. And so if you can find a similar material, it might have a different name, a different brand name, then you could deflocculate with that, or you could try it. Would you stay away from 100 dry glaze to 100 water? 100 water, That sounds like a lot of water, but it might be for an ash glaze, doing 100% dry glaze and 100% water. That might be how much water you need, but I always measure specific gravity to figure out how much water I'm going to add to a glaze. Start with 60% water like you do with the other glaze. Yeah, so if you start with 60% water, like when you're just mixing the glaze from scratch, then that's a good place to start, and that's enough water to get all the materials wet and into a liquid state, and then you can measure specific gravity and kind of go from there. And so then if you're just starting out, you're going to have to do some testing to figure out what the best specific gravity is going to be for the glaze that you're making. And so an ash glaze is going to behave much differently than regular glazes. And so I'm not sure what the value should be, but I would imagine that it's definitely going to be less than 1.5. I would say 1.5 is, you know, kind of like an average, on kind of on the high side of average. And so an ash glaze is probably going to have a specific gravity of less than 1.5. So hopefully I'm answering your questions, Hannah. So let me know. Yvan, is it also important to measure the specific gravity for slip, and is it roughly the same target measure? So yes, you can definitely measure specific gravity for slip. And I don't know if you're talking about like slips for painting your pots or casting slips, but I know people definitely measure specific gravity of a casting slip. And specific gravity is just like a way to get consistency. So if you're, you know, if you have a slip that you're using and it's working well for you, then you can just measure the specific gravity of the slip as it is now. And then that's the value that you're going to want to aim for every time you make the slip in the future. And that's just going to give you consistency. So your slip always has the same water content. And with slips that it's a painting slip, with slips that you're painting, you know, you want to make sure that it's not shrinking too much, so then it cracks, and then you have trouble with the slip drying. It can crack before it gets into the kiln, or it can crack after, like during the firing. And so having a consistent water content is going to help you make sure that your slip is always shrinking at the same rate. And so then it's always kind of, it always fits your pots. So let me know if you want to have a little chat, or let me know if that's helpful to you, Yvan. And okay, so we've got Lily here. Are you in here? There's Lily. Hi. Do you want to get on? Do you want to unmute yourself?
Sure.
There we go.
So this is my base glaze, which comes out really nice on Plainsman M340 speckle.
Yeah.
And when I use it on coffee, I'm getting a lot of tiny pinholes. It's a little bit mottled, and I just need it to melt a little bit better. And so I'm wondering, like, do I add titanium dioxide? Do I add more flux? I don't know.
Right. Yeah, so I see that a lot with clay bodies that are really high in iron. And I don't know if the coffee clay has manganese in it, but both iron and manganese tend to off-gas during the firing. So they release oxygen. And so I find a lot of people are showing me their coffee clay, and their glazes are coming out with pinholes over the coffee clay. And it really depends on your glaze recipe, like what you're starting out with, kind of like how you would remedy that.
Right.
Yeah. Do you
this
have
is the same glaze with colorants and that's just crystals. There's no pinholes. It works out really good. And so it's actually the Cedar Hill New Green base
Okay.
that
Yeah.
I'm using.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really high in Ravenscraig, I
Yeah.
think 52% or something like that. So I've played around a little bit with the UMF just to try and get a little bit higher boron. And so just the base itself, no colorants, is beautiful. I get a really nice satin finish. This again is on coffee clay, and it's lovely with some colorants, but just the base on coffee is not so good.
Okay, and what's the colorant that you've added, and how?
So I use the colorants from John Cash Blue from John Britt's book. I can't remember exactly. I'd have to pull up my recipe. Actually, I might have it.
Is it copper?
I think a little bit of cobalt. Let me just grab my binder.
Okay. Okay.
I should have pulled all that out before.
That's okay. I'm gonna pull up.
So cobalt carbonate 1%, rutile 4.
Okay, and the base glaze. When you say the base, are you adding the rutile to the base?
No.
So it's just okay. That's interesting. So the adding 4% rutile and 1% cobalt has a better effect. And so the thing is that cobalt is a flux, although it's like 1% is a very small amount, but it can affect how the glaze melts. And so that could, it could be that it just needs a little more flux, so that it's a little more fluid, and so that those pinholes are kind of healing over. Because I believe that even the glazes that are working out and are nice and smooth, they're probably bubbling during the firing, but then all those bubbles kind of smooth out. And the one that is still pinholing, those bubbles didn't get a chance to smooth out before the kiln started cooling. And so I would guess that that the base glaze just needs a little more flux.
What about adding zinc? Because I've read that zinc helps in creating more of a vellum finish. And so that's kind of been in the back of my mind about maybe adding a little bit of zinc.
Yeah, zinc is also a flux. And so that would definitely be worth trying.
What percentage do you think I should start with, Sue?
It's hard to say, like maybe 5%. I wouldn't add very much, because if you do want it to be somewhat of a similar glaze recipe, I'm just trying to pull up that glaze recipe so I can share it in the chat.
Sure.
So that was the green?
Yeah, the new green.
New green. Okay. I'm just gonna share.
Sue, can I ask Lily, are you doing a soak or at the end of how long do you soak for?
10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so you could increase the soak.
Okay.
Yeah, like up to half an hour. The only thing is so if you change your whole firing schedule for one glaze, all the other glazes are going to be affected by it. So if you have a glaze that's like close to running but not quite there, and then you put a longer soak, then there's a chance that glaze could run. So you just have to be aware of like all the repercussions of changing one thing about your firing, because all the other pots that are in that firing will be affected.
And I'm okay to start with a completely different glaze. So I was also curious if anyone has used coffee clay with a satin type finish white glaze, because this is what I'm trying to do. I've got a silhouette of a bear, so that's just the raw clay, and then I just want a white satin finish around it. So I'm not stuck to this glaze. If it doesn't work on coffee clay, I can change it up.
Hi. I'm in England, and I have no idea what you mean by coffee clay.
Oh, okay, so there's a manufacturer here in Canada called Plainsman Clay, and they've come out with this color. It's called coffee. It's a very dark.
It's like a dark, almost black, dark brown. It's a stoneware?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. And it comes out, and it's going to have a really high content of oxide in it because of its color. Because I've worked with that and had glazes completely kind of crawl and bubble up and go crazy. Fabulous effect, but not at all what I was looking for. But it was the clay itself, because there's so much iron oxide in it, you know, reacting with the glaze. So that's it, coffee. I didn't know. I assumed it was probably like the color of coffee, but good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Lily, I'm just posting my calcium matte recipe in the chat.
Okay.
And so if you click on that recipe, it's going to take you to Glazy. And I did a workshop in Whitehorse where we tested this calcium matte glaze, and there are a few tiles where they tested on the coffee clay. And so they're in the photograph, they're square tiles that are sitting flat on the table. And so none of them are pinholed. They all have colorants in them. So we didn't actually test the one without colorants on the coffee clay. But it does look nice on the M390, the Plainsman M390. So that's just a completely different recipe you could try. Yeah. And if it's too matte, like if you would like it to be a little more satin, then you could try adding silica to this recipe. So in 5% increments. Okay. And so we added 30% silica to this calcium matte recipe to make a glossy glaze. And so anywhere between 0 and 30% silica added on top of this recipe is going to kind of get you into that satin range. So that could be something to experiment with.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Sue.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Where are you, Lily? In
I'm
Canada?
in Kamloops.
Okay, I'm just gonna look in this Q&A box here. So I have a question from Barry. Barry says, can I please ask you to clarify the risks and precautions on the use of barium oxide? I am aware it is described as being very toxic. It also gives very beautiful, bright glazes. Okay, the barium conversation. So my disclaimer, I'm not a toxicologist or an expert in toxicity at all, but I am a ceramic studio technician, and part of my job is to keep our safety data sheets updated. And so I've spent a lot of time looking through the safety data sheets for all of the materials that we use at the rec center where I work. And so this question of barium comes up a lot. And the thing is barium comes in various forms. And so as you guys might know, barium sulfate is used, if you've heard of a barium enema, a lovely topic, but barium sulfate is something that they inject into our bodies to like do imaging. And so barium in and of itself can be used safely. It just depends how it is used. And barium carbonate is what we use in ceramics. Barium carbonate is toxic in the raw form if you consume it. So you have to eat the barium. It has to go through your digestive tract in order for it to poison you. And there's a limit, like every material, like barium isn't a regulated material. So lead and cadmium are the two materials that are regulated, where like companies have to disclose whether they're using them and write that they're toxic on the label and everything. So barium carbonate is one of those materials that has a toxicity level if you were to consume enough of it. And so I worked it out. I think you would have to eat 3 tablespoons of barium carbonate in order to reach the like the toxic level. And so the thing is that copper carbonate, cobalt, like there's a lot of materials that we use that if we were to consume that much of them, they would also poison us. And for some reason, barium is like this boogeyman that gets a really bad name. But like in the research that I've done, I haven't found that barium is any more harmful to us. Like if it were to be used irresponsibly and consumed, then the other materials that we use that are that we don't really pay that close attention to. And so just like silica, like almost all of our materials contain silica, and we all know that silica is very hazardous to our health if we are to breathe it in. And that's why we wear a respirator when we're mixing glazes. And so one could argue that silica is a really, really toxic material that we are all using with reckless abandon. Like our clay bodies, like as soon as our clay is dry, that is crystalline silica that can be released into the atmosphere and that we are subject to breathing it in. And so I am not here to say that you can, that barium isn't like that it's safe, perfectly safe, but I just want to just add a little perspective that any of our glaze materials can be used in a safe way. And barium does make wonderful colors. And the thing about toxicity with glaze materials is that solubility plays a really important role. And so when a material is soluble, that means that it dissolves into water. And when a material can dissolve into water, that means that it can enter our bloodstream. And barium carbonate is insoluble. So that means that if you were to touch it with your hands, you can't actually extract those toxic chemicals through your skin. They have to be ingested. Sorry, I'm just reading a comment from Daphne. I remember being told that barium always leaches and that's why it's toxic, bad in functional wear. So that's the other thing, is like your glaze composition also comes into effect. So for a glaze to leach a material, that the composition has to be like your glazes are mostly glass, and then we use fluxes to bring the melting temperature of that glass down to a temperature that our kilns can reach. And so if glass like silica glass in and of itself is pretty rock solid, and it becomes compromised when we add too much flux, and if the proportion of flux to glass former is too high, then our glazes become susceptible to leaching. And that means that leaching means that if your glaze comes into contact with an acid or a base, then it's not stable enough to stay in its composition. It would rather, these chemicals would rather leave the glaze and move into this bond with this acid or base and move outside of the glaze composition. And so there's so many variables and factors that come into play. And I've not heard that barium always leaches. I was actually taught that you can make a very stable glaze composition using barium. And so I'm gonna have to, I read a really good article about barium that I wanna dig up. I'm not sure if I have it as a PDF or something, but where I'll look for it and I'll maybe post it in the Facebook group or send it out like in an email or something. But yeah, so what I'm trying to say is like barium can be used safely, but if you're certain about your glaze compositions and how the UMF works and how to make a really good durable glaze recipe, then maybe you want to avoid barium on surfaces that are used for food. But I just don't want people to avoid it altogether because they think that it's completely harmful and toxic. I want people to understand that that it can be used in a safe way. And so I just want to go back to this question. I'm aware it is described as being very toxic, but it also gives bright, beautiful colors. Yeah, so I would recommend looking at the safety data sheet. And I don't want to recommend that people all start using barium, but I do recommend doing some research to understand the risks and the ways that barium is hazardous. Because like from my understanding is that once the barium is in a glaze recipe, that it's like the amount of barium, like the amount that could possibly be leached out, like if all of the barium was leached out of the glaze, and the glaze would fall apart, and then for you to consume all of that barium, it just seems highly unlikely to me. Strontium was what we used as a replacement. This is what Daphne's saying in the comments. Yeah, and strontium is often the recommended replacement for barium because strontium is the material that is closest in composition. So strontium is one above barium on the periodic table. So all the materials that are in the same column on the periodic table kind of perform the same function in a glaze. So both barium and strontium are alkaline earth fluxes, or are RO fluxes. And so they have the same function in a glaze. And the RO flux is what determines the color that your colorant is going to produce in the firing. And strontium and barium produce very similar colors. So you get these really bright turquoises, like bright chartreuse green colors with chrome, like a barium, like the light green in the painting behind me. You can get these really bright colors, and you can get them with barium and with strontium. And so oftentimes people will substitute barium with strontium, and I believe it's around 75%. So say you have a recipe with 50% barium, you would only use 37.5% strontium to replace that much barium. So I'm just looking at a comment from Barry. I was mainly asking about handling as I only have plans to use it on decorative items. Yeah, I mean, wear gloves and wear a respirator, and you should be totally fine. Don't eat or drink in your studio. I recommend that with all of the materials that we're using. Like, I'm not sitting there mixing glazes and drinking my coffee in the same space. So because, the materials, they're in powder form, and so they're released into the air and you can't see them, and then they can be falling onto surfaces. And so just be really careful. But I think you can use it in a safe way. And if you want to substitute strontium, you can get a lot of those great colors. Not all of the colors are the same with strontium as barium, but a lot of them are really similar. And so that's what people use. But strontium, I was looking at the safety data sheet for strontium as well. And strontium is also toxic, and if you eat enough of it. And so it's just kind of like, where do you draw the line for like materials that you're going to avoid because of their toxicity, and other materials that you're just going to use carefully. So hopefully my approach isn't too cavalier, and reckless for some of you, but I just find glaze chemistry to be fascinating, and I love to experiment. And I think that as long as you're being safe and that you know that what the risks are, that you can, yeah, no licking the glaze, that you can use some of these materials in a safe way without harming yourself or others. But I do know that the risk with barium is more to the person making the glaze than to the end user. So that's my spiel. Yes.
Just sort of going back a bit, it's really a big question, but what is UMF?
Oh, yeah. Remember. Okay. UMF is the unity molecular formula. And so what that means is we have a glaze recipe. And so our glaze recipe lists all these materials. So we can have like whiting, which is calcium carbonate, and nephsi, which is mostly sodium, some potassium, silica, and alumina. We have EPK, which is silica and alumina. So all of our materials can be broken down into the elements on the periodic table, or the oxides. And so what the UMF does is it takes a glaze recipe and it breaks it down into all of those specific elements. So you can see how much silica, how much alumina, how much of the fluxes, like how much calcium, how much magnesium. So it breaks it all down. And then what it does is it puts the glass formers into proportion with the fluxes. And that's just like a little bit of extra math that it would take a long time for me to explain. But what it does is it just shows you that it puts all the fluxes together, and the fluxes always add up to 1. And so you can always see proportionately, okay, for every 1, and when I say 1, I'm talking about moles, which I could say molecules. So for every 1 molecule of flux in this glaze recipe, I have, 3 molecules of silica. And so, and when you learn to read the UMF and kind of analyze your glaze recipes, you'll start to notice patterns where if your silica and alumina levels are really low, then you're going to have runny glazes, and you might have crazing glazes. And if your silica and alumina is really high, then your glaze might melt at a higher temperature, and those sorts of things. And so, so the UMF is just a way of just breaking down the recipe into the individual elements so we can see what the glaze is made of. Because in any recipe, like if you have nephsi, you're getting silica from your nephsi, and then you could be getting silica from your EPK, and you could be getting silica from your frit. And so there's all these different ways of getting silica into a glaze, and this just kind of adds it all up so you can look at it at a glance.
Thank you.
Okay, so if anyone has any more questions about barium, please speak now, or I'm going to move on. And there's a question in the Q&A box. Bisque firing, cone 08, so this is from Diane. Cone 08, 06, or 04, what is the effect or benefits of the different bisque temperatures? Okay, so when we bisque fire, what we're doing is we're taking our clay that is really fragile, and we're firing it so that it's more durable for the glazing process. And as we fire the clay at bisque temperature becomes really porous, and those pores are what help the glaze to stick to the pots when we're glazing them. And so as we go up in temperature, so say we bisque fire to cone 08, our pots are going to be much softer. So as we go up in temperature, the pots become more like harder, stronger, more durable. So at cone 08, the pore network is going to be much larger. And then as you increase temperature, the pores get smaller. And so the difference between cone 04 and cone 08, so at 08, you're gonna have more pores and you're gonna have larger pores. And so your pots are gonna absorb more water when you're glazing, which can lead to a thicker glaze application. So a higher temperature is gonna give you more durable pots. So sometimes if you're bisquing to too low of a temperature, your pots can be more fragile, like the clay is just much softer. If you think of bisque compared to a fully vitrified piece fired to cone 6, the high fired piece is much stronger, whereas a piece of bisqueware can break easily. So as you go increase in temperature, you're increasing the durability of the piece for the glazing process, which can be helpful if you're using tongs to dip your pots. Sometimes if your pots are too soft, those tongs, if you hold it too tight, you can, the tongs can go right through the clay. And so the pore network decreases as you go higher in temperature. So sometimes I'm just thinking of like instances where you would want to bisque to a higher or lower temperature. Like I bisque fire to cone 06. And, but when I was in school, we were bisque firing to cone 04. And so the reason why I changed to cone 06 was because I make quite thin porcelain pieces. And what I was finding was at cone 04, because the pore network becomes smaller, my pots weren't absorbent enough. So I was glazing the inside of my piece. And when you glaze, your bisque becomes saturated with water. And if it becomes completely saturated, then you have to wait for that water to dry before you can continue glazing. And so I was finding that because the porcelain was really thin, and then because I was also bisque firing to a higher temperature, my glaze was taking forever to dry because the bisque was becoming saturated with that first dip. So I would pour the glaze onto the inside and dump it out, and then it would just take forever for the bisque to dry enough for me to glaze the outside. And what would happen is if I tried to glaze the outside of my piece before the bisque was dry, that outside glaze was just wet forever. Like it would stay wet until the next day. And as we know, like we want our glaze to dry to the touch fairly instantaneously so we can like pick up our pots and move them into the kiln. And so by lowering my bisque temperature, I was increasing the size of the pore network so that my bisque could handle more water before it became fully saturated. And so that helped me with my glaze application. And so when your pots are quite thin, you also don't have as many pores as you would have if your pots were thicker. And so often when if you're making really thin wares and you're having trouble with glaze application, then bisque firing to a lower temperature can help you with that. It just helps to increase the amount of pores in the bisque so that it can, the bisque can absorb more water and a more even glaze coat. So hopefully, was that Diane? Diane, hopefully that answers your question. There are other reasons for changing, sorry, just reading a comment here. Lower temp bisque have remained carbonaceous matter. Yeah, so there's also like organics, materials that burn out. So the higher the temperature, the more those organic materials are going to burn out. I'm under the impression that by the time we get to our bisque temperature, anything that's organic is long gone because it's such a high temperature, like we're talking like 1900 degrees Fahrenheit. But I think that also pinholes, And I don't know, I've seen lowering your bisque temperature help fix pinholes, and also raising your bisque temperature help fix pinholes. And so it all depends on why the pinholes are there to begin with. And I think it probably depends on the glaze recipe and how well it's melted and a lot of other things. There's always like so many factors that come into the reasons why we should be doing this or that with ceramics. So Jacqueline says M370 likes 05 bisque. Yeah, and so you can play with your bisque temperature. It's not going to, like, it's not really going to affect your pots in a negative way, like if you wanted to try a load at a different temperature. But I generally like to not change anything unless I have a reason for doing so. Like, so if I'm trying to solve an issue where, you know, my glaze isn't drying fast enough, then I might lower my bisque temperature. But if everything's working well with what I'm doing, then I tend to just leave it, because once you change one thing, then it can lead to all these other things that can go wrong. And so sometimes just sticking with what is working can be the best way to move forward. So, and Diane says that was super helpful. So that is great. Just looking at the Q&A again, here we have a question from Renew. I have a cone art kiln electric and want to ask appropriate bisque firing ramp cycle, and what is the right temperature to bisque for cone 6 glazing? So your bisque temperature, like your final temperature and your bisque temperature aren't really related. So your bisque temperature is determined by, like, your bisque temperature affects how your glaze is going to apply and how your pots are going to respond to the glazing process. And as I said, like, you know, softer bisque could be more fragile if you're dipping, that sort of thing. And so it doesn't actually matter, like if you're firing to cone 6, as long as your clay is rated for cone 6, you can be bisque firing to cone 08 or 06 or 04. Some people even bisque fire to cone 012, like, so your final maturing temperature doesn't have anything to do with your bisque temperature. So I just want to, like, separate those two, because even cone 10 clay, so I fired a cone 6, it sounds like you fired a cone 6 as well, but even when you're firing to cone 10, with cone 10 clay, you can still be bisque firing to any of these various low temperatures, and it just depends on how porous and how durable you want your bisque to be. And then the other question was appropriate bisque firing ramp cycle. So I would have to go into work and to get my bisque ramp cycle. I don't know if any of you guys have a bisque firing ramp cycle that you want to share. But generally, Digital Fire has a few for bisque firings. Yeah. So digitalfire.com, I'm just going to share the link in the chat here. Digitalfire.com is a really good resource for so many things. If you want to, oh, I'm just talking to Lily. Just a second, I have to respond to the whole group. Yeah, digitalfire.com. If you want to look at materials, they have lots of different firing schedules for bisque and glaze firings, different temperatures. They have glaze recipes. I generally use this site to look up materials because there's just so much information, and it's really good. And so that's a really good resource to use. And I do know that they have a lot of firing schedules on there that people were sharing last week or the week before as well. So, okay. So I'm just going back to, and if anyone if any of you want to chime in at any time, you're more than welcome to. So I just want to say that again. Oh, and I see Stephen has put up his hand. And if anyone is not on, doesn't have their video on and would like to chat, just please raise your hand and then I can promote you to be a panelist. So, okay. I will go back to the chat here, or the Q&A section. Edmund says, can you talk about washes that can be used to give fired clay / porcelain a self-glazing surface? I'm looking for a satiny finish rather than a glass finish. So we use stains at the studio where I work. We provide stains where we just mix red iron oxide with water, or cobalt carbonate with water, or copper carbonate. We do a rutile one, and then we do a black mason stain one. So we mix those with water. And then I also add a little bit of Gersley borate. And so we do 4 to 1 by a spoonful. So I'll do, so for every 4 teaspoons of oxide, so red iron or cobalt or copper, I will add 1 teaspoon of Gersley borate. And what that does, so that's a 4 to 1 ratio, 4 parts oxide, 1 part Gersley borate. And what that does is it helps the oxide, because oxides on their own, they don't actually, there's nothing holding them onto the bisque. And if you just use an oxide mixed with water, what I found is that during the firing, it can fall off onto the glaze, onto the kiln shelves, because there's no flux kind of holding it onto there. And so we added a little bit of Gersley borate, which helps to solidify it and helps it to stick to the bisque during the firing, or stick to the pot during the firing. And if you were to use, so if you were to increase, because I tried like 1 to 1, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, and 4 to 1, and I think it was at 2 to 1 or 3 to 1. So oxide to Gersley borate. So if you had like 2 to 1 or 3 to 1, it did give more of a shiny surface. And so you could try that, where you mix 2 parts copper carbonate, 1 part Gersley borate. And I don't weigh it. I just use like a teaspoon. Mix that with water and use that as a wash. And that will probably give you a shiny surface, but not like a glassy surface. It'll give you a bit of a sheen. Don't put it on the bottoms of your pots, because they could stick to the kiln shelves, because what it is doing is it's just fluxing that colorant a little bit. And so you're not getting like the full glassy surface, but just like a little bit of a shine. So hopefully that answers your question, Edmund. And if anyone else has experience with washes or stains or anything, then please let us know. Just looking at the chat here. Chatting about wood ash, lots of calcium and potassium in wood ash. Yes. Okay.
I can chime in here.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Here in Exeter, I run a cooperative pottery group, and some of the people on here, Debbie and Barry and stuff, are part of that group. So I have a number of different members, and therefore all using different glazes, and we have inherited a lot of glazes from a previous cooperative, and so we have a huge weird selection of glazes, some which have been made up and some which we've inherited, which I know something about because I probably made them originally being part of the other cooperative. But we are finding now that a number of glazes are running that I didn't remember running before. And I also, because I'm firing, like any ceramics technician, I might be firing 6 people's stuff in one load. So we tend to do a sort of average temperature for firing because everybody's using different stuff. We also will occasionally do a low firing load or something. We'll adapt that. But so I just wondered if there's anything you would use as a kind of very common thing to put into any glaze in order to help it not run. I mean, that's a fun question because the glazes, of course, are all different glazes.
Yeah. Are you using cones? Are you using witness cones?
Don't tend to use cones in so much here. It's just temperature. You know, I have temperatures. We have a digital programmer, and so I work to certain temperatures. So you know, if you tell me a cone, I won't automatically know without looking at a chart what that equivalent is in temperature. And we work in centigrade temperature. Yeah.
So, so the thing is that kilns, kilns, so the final temperature that your pots are fired to can vary depending on the length of the firing. And so I wrote an article called, Do You Put Witness Cones in Every Firing? And in that article, I explain the difference between temperature and heat work. And I can post a link in the chat. But basically, it's possible that if these glazes didn't used to run in the past, you could be over firing them. And the way that you would find that out is to just put a cone pack in your next firing and you don't have to, I mean, if you can look through the PEEP and like watch the cones fall at the end of the firing, that's ideal. But you can just stick a cone pack in, and then when you're unloading the kiln, you're looking at it to see if you are over firing or under firing. And
I've done some tests like that. I have cones and I have done that.
Okay.
And it seemed to be relatively accurate.
Okay.
Because we're using 2 quite old kilns, so we thought, maybe we are having trouble, and maybe it's, you know, the temperature is nothing like what we think it is. Yeah. But I haven't done it as a regular thing. I've done the occasional test, which has worked fine. That doesn't mean it's always working fine.
Yeah. And have you used cones like since you've noticed these glazes running?
No, as I say, I've done it as sort of an occasional test.
Yeah.
But I haven't put a cone into every firing, no. I haven't, because it's just kind of not my habit. So I get it all set and run off, and then I go, oh, I didn't put a cone in.
Yeah, for sure. So you could try just like with your next firing, and that'll just tell you, because generally, you know, your firings are going to be fairly consistent. So that'll tell you at least whether, you know, your past firings have been reaching the right temperature or if they've been overfiring, because that would be a much easier thing to fix than trying to fix these glazes that are already mixed and like mixed with water. And so it's hard to know like how to adjust a glaze once it's already in the bucket. Like there isn't, you know, if I'm trying to increase the firing temperature of a glaze, then I will increase the silica and alumina by adding some EPK and a little bit of silica. But I would be using the UMF, so the Unity Molecular Formula, to do this in a very methodical way. And I would just take the beginning recipe and I would make a test, and then I would add a bit of silica and EPK and do another test, and then do like a line of tests, and then see which one works out the best.
What are you saying there? Not the silica. What's the other thing you mentioned?
Silica and alumina. And you get alumina from clay. So EPK.
EPK.
It's kaolin.
Oh, that's the one. Yeah, I've been hearing about kaolin.
Yeah, but you can also use any type of clay. So there's Grollig, there's ball clay, or just kaolin. Sometimes it's just called kaolin. It depends where you're getting it.
Kaolin is a clay element?
Kaolin is a clay, yeah.
That helps.
Yeah.
We have a lot. We don't have that. We have all kinds of ball plates. We have all the kind of raw ingredients, but I don't have not got that, nor have I ever heard of it. I mean,
Right,
I've heard of it, but I've never seen it anywhere. But whether it's not a UK name for something, it's hard to
Yeah,
get names for the same thing here and in
totally.
North
Could
America.
be China clay. They might know it as China clay.
Right.
Yeah,
You see, this is, yeah.
China clay, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're in the UK?
Because we have China clay. Yeah.
Okay.
We're
Yeah.
in Devon. I'm Canadian. I'm from Toronto, but I live
Okay.
here.
Yeah. Okay. Because yeah, so kaolin is clay. EPK is the brand name. So EPK stands for
Okay.
Edgar Plastic Kaolin. So that's just a brand, and it's a North American brand. And so
Exactly.
yeah, so but kaolin, so China clay is also kaolin.
Yeah, we
Grawl
have
egg
China
is
clay.
yeah.
A big, huge quantities of it here, actually.
Yeah, and if you
Out of Cornwall, most of it in Britain.
right. So if you just add clay to your recipe, it's going to actually change the recipe, like change the surface. And so if you add clay, it's going to move, it can move a glossy glaze to become a matte glaze. If you add too much, like you're trying to reduce running, so you want to just add enough to reduce the running, because if you keep adding more, then your glaze could be under fired.
If you look at
Yep.
the original recipe of the glaze, and you see, you know, what the particular clay element is within that glaze, would it make sense to just increase the original clay element that was in that recipe? Because
Yes,
the different recipes will have a different element.
exactly.
So you just
Yeah.
look at that recipe and maybe just increase that a bit and then do tests and see if it's changing.
Yeah, so definitely. So whatever the clay is in your recipe, that's what I would increase. And I believe it's like for every 1%, I think it's 1%, you add 1% clay and 1.25% silica, or I could have that totally backwards. But in order, I would have to do some calculations to get it for sure. But when you add clay and silica, it's the silica to alumina ratio that determines whether your glaze is going to be glossy or matte. And so if you have a glossy glaze and you start just adding EPK, you're going to be increasing the alumina, but not increasing the silica at the same proportion. And so then you're changing the ratio of silica to alumina, and then so your glaze can move from glossy to matte. So, but if you're not too concerned, like if you would rather have your glaze not running and not so concerned about like whether it's glossy or matte, then you could just add the clay element and just increase that a little bit.
Okay, I'll have to do some experimenting.
Yeah, for sure. But just add a very little bit at a time. Like if you have the original recipes, I would make a little test sample of the original recipe, dip a test tile, and then add, you know, a couple percent clay, and then dip another tile and add another couple percent, because it's not gonna, it probably won't, if these recipes you didn't used to run and they're running now, it could have been that they were under fired before and now they're being fired to the correct temperature. And so it probably isn't going to take much to get that running to stop.
I mean, I do have an issue in that I'm putting in a number of glazes in together of a number of people's different work and averaging the temperature. So obviously some things are at possibly higher and some things are at a lower. So that's a kind of given problem with this operation. But I also think things have changed, and that's, you know, from how they were behaving. So.
Yeah, and the other thing, like glazes can also run when they're too thick. So the other thing is like if the glazes are too thick, like all the glazes in my studio, like where I work, most of them will run if they're applied really thickly. And so the way that I've kind of, because there's so many people, we have about 250 people that use our studio on a weekly basis, and the experience level, like from complete beginner to quite experienced. So the way that we've made our glazes kind of user-friendly for everyone is by measuring the specific gravity, because then the water content is always the same, and then the application thickness is then the same. And so people can get better at glazing when there's consistency, when the glazes has a consistent water content every time they're using it. Then they get used to, like, okay, if I dip it for 3 seconds, I get this effect. If I dip it for 5 seconds, it might start to run, and they can sort of learn how the glazes work. But if the water content goes up and then down, and then, you know, they tried it this way last time, and then they tried the same thing this time, but they got a completely different result, then yeah, it can be tricky to kind of figure it out.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else with their videos on have a question or want to say something? Stephen, hi.
Hi, I think I have everything working now.
Okay.
A lot of buttons here. I'm actually surprised to be here learning glaze chemistry, because when I restarted this hobby 50 years later, I realized that going into it, I thought, oh, the challenge is going to be throwing big pots. Well, I can throw big pots, but now I need to glaze them. And I'm a big do-it-yourselfer, so I got into the glaze, and it ended up having to remember my college chemistry and procedures. So I'm having to find glassware and all of that. But my application, while I've got my base glaze in the bucket, which is, you know, a little under a gallon using your numbers, the 2,000 grams of powder, it comes out a little less than a gallon. And before I divide it, I check the specific gravity. I just started doing that. And so I got it to about 1.5. And then I went ahead and divided that up into the cups and added the other dry material oxides to get the colorants pretty much from your list. And what I'm finding, though, and I have changed the way I've been doing it several times, but I was taking a spray applicator and watering the pots and the tiles a little bit. And when I put the glaze on, of course, it sucked all the water out and it cracks. And so in some times I would go ahead and spray the tiles, and some of it would melt back together. I'm trying to get them to the kiln in good shape. And they might melt back together, they might not, I don't know. So, but then I took a couple of the pots. I had a bunch of bisque-fired pots that were small ones that I wouldn't really favor. And so I'm using those as test tiles as well, because the glaze will act differently on those surfaces than the test tiles. That's what I was figured. And I might be lucky and get a couple of them turn out nice. Anyway, those were doing the same thing. And so I stopped after the first one and saw the whole crackling glaze. And I dipped it in a bucket of water and then dumped it out. And I got a little better results. But I still wasn't happy with that. So I used some of that gum, the CMC gum, and ended up putting about 10 milliliters in my cup sample. And that actually came out pretty good. That was with a copper carbonate, and just very slight cracks in it. in the raw glaze. My question is, and I heard someone mention that they were soaking their pots, their bisqueware before. Can you tell some more about that? Because I was just spraying it and then finally dipped one, and so I'm kind of clueless on this.
Okay. And so why are you spraying them to begin with?
I was spraying them with water.
Yeah. And
So
so,
it doesn't work so fast.
pardon? I missed that.
Well, when you're doing masonry work, the bricks are sometimes porous, and you'll stand there with a hose and hose those down before you apply mortar, so the mortar doesn't dry out so fast. So I was trying to apply a building trade to
Okay.
process. So I was wetting the pots so they wouldn't suck all the moisture out of the glaze.
Okay. And then the issue that you were having is the glaze was cracking before
Yes,
you get it into the kiln.
that's what it was all about. Yeah.
Okay.
Crack.
Okay. So we actually want our bisque to suck all the water out of our glaze when we glaze. Like, so that is the ideal situation, because water is what makes our glazes and our clay shrink. And so the more water that's in our clay and the more water that's in our glazes, the more like that water takes up space. And then as the water evaporates, the particles move closer together, and that's what causes shrinking. So if your bisque is completely dry and you dip your bisque into the glaze and it sucks all the water out right away of the glaze, then your glaze particles, they align themselves in a really compact layer on the bisque. And then there's no shrinking because all the water is already gone. The water's inside the bisque and eventually it will evaporate. But all those glaze particles are in a compact layer on the bisque. If the bisque is already saturated with water, and therefore it cannot pull the water out of the glaze instantly, then the water stays within the glaze, in between the glaze particles, and then the water evaporates, and then those glaze particles start to shrink as the water evaporates, and then the shrinking is what's leading to the cracking of the glaze before it gets into the kiln. So I would suggest, like, I do rinse my bisque when it comes out of the kiln. So I take a bucket of clean water and I dunk all my pots in water just to get rid of dust or whatever can happen, like can fall onto the pots, like kiln wash from the firing. And then I wait at least a day for that water to evaporate so my pots are completely dry before glazing. So that could be one reason why the glaze is cracking, is because the water doesn't have anywhere to go, and so it stays within the glaze, and then the glaze shrinks as it dries. But the other issue, it could be that your glaze needs to be deflocculated. So sometimes if it depends on the glaze recipe, but if you have a glaze recipe where the glaze is naturally flocculated, what that means is that the glaze hangs on to the water. So even if your bisque is completely dry, because a flocculated glaze, the particles stick together like magnets, and they hold that water in between. And so when you dip your bisque into a flocculated glaze, it doesn't suck all the water out right away. The water kind of stays trapped in between the glaze particles. And so that can also lead to cracking if your glaze is too flocculated where it needs to be deflocculated. And what deflocculating does is that that attraction between the clay particles, it breaks that attraction. So the particles in the glaze are no longer attracted to each other, so they're not hanging on to that water, and it allows the water to be sucked out of the glaze and into the bisque fairly instantaneously after dipping it. So those are kind of two reasons why a glaze could be cracking before it enters the kiln. And one other reason could be because if a glaze has too much clay in it, as we know, clay shrinks while it dries, and clay absorbs water naturally. And so if your glaze has a high percentage, like over 20% clay, so EPK or ball clay or kaolin or any of the clays, as the glaze dries, those clay particles shrink just like our regular clay does that we're working with. And then that can also lead to cracking when the glaze dries. So those are three reasons. And I don't know if any of those speak to you where you're like, that's probably it.
I'm taking notes on this end.
Okay.
I'll have to go back and check my base formulas again. I think I'm searching for the right base formulas with the sacks of chemicals that I have. I've got 10 sacks, and then I've got a shelf full of other chemicals. I just kind of took an average. I didn't find your list until later, and I just took an average of stuff because I'm also working with raku glazes.
Oh, yeah.
I started out 50 years ago doing raku, and then I decided, well, I would like some ware that could be used, for utilitarian purposes. And so I'm having come up with better glazes because raku is simply decorative. So, well, thank you very much, and we'll stay in contact with the page on Facebook.
Yeah, and if you want to post your recipe, your base recipe in the Facebook group, I'd be happy to have a look at it and let you know what I think.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's another ingredient, Gersley borate, which you will often find in a lot of raku glazes because it brings the firing temperature down. And Gersley borate is another material that absorbs water and hangs onto the water and then leads to shrinking and cracking. So if there's a lot of clay or Gersley borate in a glaze recipe, then that can often lead to cracking.
Well, I do have some of that in this last base glaze test.
Okay.
Is there a way to counter that in the base glaze?
Yeah, so usually glazes that have a lot of Gersley borate in them need to be deflocculated. And so Darvan 7 is what I use to deflocculate.
I have that.
Okay, so if that's the case where your glaze has a lot of Gersley borate and or clay, then adding, if you just have a little sample test, I would just add 1 or 2 drops of Darvan, mix it really, really well, and you should visibly notice it thin down. Like it'll go from being kind of thick, thick where it doesn't move very fast, to like where it's swirling around. And then
I think that's what I needed to hear.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be the key. So I will try that this afternoon, and I'll
report back.
All
Okay.
right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So just one word for Stephen. When you were talking about soaking, Stephen, I think we are talking about soaking the temperature, like in the kiln, after reach the temperature that you wanted. That was the soaking that we are talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, in the kiln?
Yes. So if you can.
I have an old kiln and I've put an instrument controller on it so I can program a soak. So thank you.
Yeah, as opposed to soaking with water, soaking with temperature. Yeah.
On both ends.
Yeah, there are different ways we can soak our pots. Great. Well, that was a great question. Wendy, I see your hand up. I can unmute you. There.
What does it mean by soaking in the kiln? Because I'm new all to this.
Yeah, so what that means is when you reach your top temperature, instead of letting the kiln just cool, like turn off and cool, you want to hold that top temperature. So it's not increasing in temperature, it's just holding at the top, and you call that a soak. And so you're holding at this top temperature for, 10, 20, 30 minutes, depending. Just so that the glazes have a chance to, sometimes for the pinholes to heal over, sometimes just for for them to just kind of become more fluid. Because sometimes if you reach temperature and then the kiln starts cooling right away, some glazes just need a little more time at that top temperature to fully mature and maybe mingle with the other glazes, and hopefully not run. But that's what soaking means.
Okay, thank you. I finally got to use my new kiln.
Okay.
I just did the bisque firing, and where it's electrical, oh, it was fun. I was so excited. And because where I have all hand-built pieces, so I put it on the hand-built one. So it was like 15 hours.
Okay.
It took its time going up, and everything made it through without any cracking.
Perfect. Oh, congratulations. That's really exciting. Yeah. And so do you have a programmable kiln then?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can program. So when you hit your program, I think it gives an option to add a hold at the end. Yes. Yeah. Yes. And so that's the soak. The hold is the soak. Okay. So you could program it to hold for, 10 minutes or something. And generally you would do that not in a bisque firing, but in a glaze firing. So if you wanted to try it, that would be how. You just program a hold at the end.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. Anyone else want to unmute themselves and say something? Fiorenzo.
Okay.
Here, I've unmuted you.
I want to ask you if it is, you are talking about soak in the kiln. Is it all the time for all the glazes useful to do that?
Well, it's not necessary. Like I have a manual kiln at home. And so at work, we have programmable kilns. At home, I have a manual kiln sitter kiln. And so it's much harder to soak in a manual kiln because it's hard to hold that temperature. You kind of just have to like turn the dials down to medium and hope for the best. And so it's not a requirement, but it's often something that gets used to remedy a problem. So like with pinholing, for example, that's often like if you have pinholes, it usually means that the glaze didn't have enough time for those bubbles to heal over. So adding a soak at the end, so it doesn't increase the temperature, so hopefully your glazes aren't going to start running, but it just gives it more time in that liquid state for those, those pinholes to heal over.
But if you do all the time, it's not a problem. So you can do that for in case of pinholes and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So at work, we program a hold in all of our glaze firings, and it's because it's helpful for some glazes. Other glazes don't need it, but they don't care either way.
Okay.
So yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Andrea, hi. Welcome.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. My question's about a clear glaze that I've been using for many years on the same clay body. And I've recently noticed some pieces that are about 15 to 20 years old have developed crazing now. So it doesn't show up for a very long time, and I'm just wondering how to go about correcting that.
Right. Yeah, so crazing over that amount of time, I think that just means that your glaze and your clay body are so close to fitting perfectly. And so I would need to see the glaze recipe in order to kind of give advice on what to do about it.
Sure.
Because different recipes, depending on what you're starting with, there's different ways to reduce crazing.
This is a pretty straightforward glaze. It has 50% Frit 3134, 30% EPK, and 20% flint or silica.
Yeah.
And I just add 2% bentonite just for suspension.
Okay.
That's it.
I'm just entering this recipe into Glazy. So it was 50% Frit 3134, 30% EPK, 20% silica.
Yep.
Huh, that is a very simple recipe. And this is a cone 6.
Cone 6 on, I don't know if you're familiar with MCS from Tucker's in Ontario.
Okay, I'm familiar with Tucker's, but I haven't used their clays.
Yeah, it's a porcelaneous, you know, cone 6.
Okay.
Clay. Yeah.
So this is an interesting recipe. Just from looking at it, it's really high in boron. So if I was looking at this recipe without talking to you, I would assume it was a low fire.
Okay.
A low fire recipe, but you don't have any trouble with it running at cone
No.
6?
No, I do apply it fairly thinly.
Okay.
Because I decorate on greenware doing mishma. So I just need a really thin coat.
Right.
But no, I've never had any, unless it goes on super thick, and then I'll get a little bit of running.
Okay. So if I were trying to reduce crazing, like it's not crazing right away, but basically to reduce the thermal expansion. So the ingredient in this recipe that has the highest thermal expansion is sodium. And so I would reduce the sodium, and you're getting the sodium from the Frit 3134.
Yeah.
This might be something that I can play around with outside of this chat, and then I could email you the recipe, or if you're in my Facebook group, it might be helpful for others to see like how I go about doing this. But the problem is we won't know if it's helped anything for like 15 years, right?
Exactly.
But we can make some small adjustments that are only going to help, and then as long as the glaze still looks how you want it to look, then I can't see it hurting anything.
Okay.
And so I'd be happy to
Sure.
do that.
I do follow along on Facebook, so
okay.
I can just ask you the question again on
Sure.
Facebook.
Yeah, and then I can respond in there.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Shelley.
Yes, hi, Sue. Thank you so much for all of this.
You're welcome.
Coordinating. I learned a lot. So I had a question about the Darvan 7. Can that be used? Can that be added to a commercial glaze that's become a bit thick, or is it to use water to thin it out?
So a commercial glaze that has become thick is probably become thick because water has evaporated. So that's generally like what can naturally occur is water is evaporating. But have you measured the specific gravity of your glazes before? Because
no, well, I used to when I was at a co-op when we made them, but this glaze, it was a Celadon, I can't get the name of it now, but anyway, it was a new bottle that I opened and it was thick. It came thick.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we had that. I mean, we just ordered some underglazes, and one of them was like almost solid. It was so thick. And we just added water you just want to make sure that you don't add too much water. So the reason it's thick, I would say, is because of water evaporating. It's probably just been sitting around for a long time. So adding water back in, but just be careful not to add too much water, because what we added a little too much water to our underglaze, which caused it to shrink too much as it dried, and then it cracked. And so we have this underglaze that cracks before, like as it dries. And so we had to let some of that water evaporate again.
Okay. And then another question about the oxide washes and stuff. There's a copper wash that I've used at another place I've gone to, 50% copper carbonate with 50% Frit 3110 and 2.5 cups of water. Is the Frit better than the Gertzley borate to use?
The Frit would be doing the same thing. So just helping that copper to stick to the pot. So I think, yeah, I think that's totally fine. Because the Frit contains boron, which is like a low temperature, like it melts at a low temperature. So the boron is what helps that the copper just to stick to the pot, because it melts at such a low temperature that then it becomes kind of fused to the clay. So, because otherwise the copper just kind of can fall off.
Okay, so one is better than another.
I wouldn't say no. Yeah, and I've also heard of doing like half and half Frit and oxides as well. I just used Gertzley borate because it has a bit of a suspending property. So Frit tends to settle in the bottom, whereas Gertzley borate kind of helps everything stay floating. And so that's why I chose Gertzley borate over a Frit for that purpose. Okay. Yeah.
All right, I'll try that then. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, anyone else have a question or a comment?
I have a question.
Yeah, okay. Hi, Deb.
Hello. So I have a bucket of glaze that was called Chun Celadon, and it was hard panning. Yes. So I added Epsom salts and got it into suspension.
Okay.
And the next time I went to use it, it was as if it was all gelled, right? So it was quite thickened and throughout all the same. So I deflocculated it a little bit again with Darvan.
Okay.
And then it started hard panning again. It was separating out. So how do you find the right amount to add in to keep it nice and fluid without gelling and without separating?
Okay, so what I do, so before you flocculate, a hard pan glaze is generally going to be quite thin. So when you're stirring it, it's gonna like move around and around the bucket. Like, so you could be stirring it, you stop stirring, and the glaze just kind of keeps moving around because it's really thin and fluid. Mm-hmm. And so I generally, depending on the bucket size, so here are the parameters I use, but say it's like a small test, like a small test cup, I would add a couple of drops at a time. If it's like a couple gallons, like a bucket about this size, I would use a teaspoon at a time. And then for larger buckets, I generally add a tablespoon at a time. So I take my glaze that needs to be flocculated, and I will add, so say adding a teaspoon of Epsom salt solution, and then I use a high-speed mixer. I'm going like this, but I would use a drill or a hand blender or something, because that is going to activate the Epsom salts right away. Because the thing is if you're just stirring it in, sometimes it takes time for it to have an effect and for the Epsom salts to, you know, kind of reach all of those glaze particles to flocculate them. And so I will always mix with a high-speed mixer, and then until I visibly notice the glaze thicken, and while I'm mixing it. And then when you stop mixing, I'm watching for the glaze to swirl around the bucket once or twice and then stop. And so I don't want it to become so thick that when I stop mixing, the glaze doesn't move at all. So I want it to, so if you're stirring, I want it to, when I stop stirring, I want it to swirl around once, maybe twice, and then stop. And that to me is perfectly flocculated, where it's not going to become gelled, as you say. So I think like if you add too much flocculant, and it's easy to do that if you're not high speed mixing. So I don't know if you were high speed mixing or like
no, I probably was just stirring it in.
Yeah, so I think that could be why, is that it didn't look flocculated, so maybe you added a little bit more, but then over time it activated all of those particles, and so there was just a little too much flocculant in there. So I think high-speed mixing at the time of when you're flocculating is going to help you to know when to stop.
Okay, so is there such a thing of going too many times back and forth between flocculating and unflocculating?
Eventually it's not gonna do anything. So yeah, so you can't just go back and forth forever, because I think when you're flocculating, it's affecting some of the particles, but not all of them. And then when you deflocculate, you're affecting some of the other particles, and then eventually all the particles will either be flocculated or deflocculated, and then they can't be affected anymore. And so so there could still be hope for getting that glaze back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sue, in your course, there was, when you were demonstrating online, there was a point where you said, you know, you could go back and forth, and then you can get to a point where it just suddenly just becomes this sludge. And in that situation, you said there's no going back. It's just like you might as well throw it out, is my extrapolation of what you were saying. So that's a little different than the answer you just gave. So could you speak into that a little?
Yeah, so that is when you add too much deflocculant. So when you over deflocculate. So in this case, we're talking about like flocculating a little bit and then deflocculating a little bit to go back and then flocculating a little bit more. But if you keep deflocculating your glaze, and I haven't found this with Darvan, but definitely with sodium silicate. So sodium silicate is a deflocculant where if you add too much, your glaze, so as you deflocculate your glaze, it becomes thinner and thinner, and then all of a sudden it starts thickening back up again. And if that happens to you, then that is the point of no return, where you're only deflocculating. So you're not going back and forth between flocculating and deflocculating, where you're only adding more and more deflocculant, and then all of a sudden, oops, I added too much and my glaze has started to thicken back up again. That's when it's toast. And so that's called over-deflocculation. So there's a difference between like deflocculating and then going backwards and flocculating. But when you over-deflocculate, it appears that it's thickening, so it looks like it's becoming flocculated again, but actually it's a completely different reaction. And yeah, and it turns into sludge. And I've tried several ways of coming back from that, and I haven't been able to figure it out. I thought that maybe if I added lots and lots of water and mixed it up and then poured all the water off the top, that maybe some of the deflocculant would be released. And I didn't have success with that. But I do think possibly if you got to the point where your glaze was over deflocculated, you could maybe double your recipe, which would cut your deflocculant in half, and that could be a way of salvaging your over deflocculated glaze by just adding more glaze that hasn't been deflocculated. But I have not tried that yet. Yes, Andrea.
There we go.
Yeah.
I have another question, and it's about deflocculating your clay body.
Yes.
So I'd like to, I think deflocculating. So I'm using the same clay body for years and years, and it has Epsom salt in it in the formula, but I would like to perhaps use it as a pour, a slip that I can pour onto a plaster bat, so like a casting slip. Can I deflocculate an already flocculated clay body?
Yeah, I haven't actually heard of flocculating a clay body, but your clay recipe has Epsom salts in it?
Yeah, it's a commercial clay body. I know it has Epsom salt in it, but I don't really know how much or.
Okay.
Do you think I maybe just try it and see if it works, I suppose?
Yeah, it's very common to deflocculate like a casting slip. And the reason that we would deflocculate a casting slip is so that we can make it thin without adding water. And so, because water is what leads to shrinkage, so we want to get that clay into a liquid state using as little water as possible. And that's where the,
what I'm thinking of is making it behave like a casting slip, so that I can make slabs that when you are building with them, they act like a casting slip instead of just like regular slab. So I was just trying to create a casting slip from my clay that I have now.
Yeah.
Because I can't get any casting slip right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's definitely worth a shot.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, any suggestion on how I might, like how much I might use, or should I try sodium silicate or Darvan or?
Definitely Darvan over sodium silicate.
Okay.
I avoid sodium silicate just because it's really easy to screw it up.
Okay.
And so does your clay come in powder form then?
No, it actually comes in bricks.
Yeah, a block.
That's what I have on hand.
Right. And
so I have to make a slip out of it first.
Yeah.
Adding water, right?
Yeah. So I would add, as little water as you can to get it into a liquid form, but start adding Darvan right away. And because Darvan is going to break up those clay particles that are stuck together, right. And it's going to help them break apart and turn into a liquid form. Okay. And so, and you want to use a high-speed mixer for sure.
Yeah.
And you're just adding, like, it depends how much. And there is, I know with casting slips, like there's a formula for how much Darvan you use, but I don't actually know what that is. But I would just be, adding a few drops at a time, mixing really well until you get it to the liquid state that you want.
One more question. I'm not sure I have Darvan on hand, so I'll have to look. But I know I have soda ash.
Okay.
Would that work as well?
I've never used soda ash as a deflocculant. I know that sometimes people mix soda ash with sodium silicate and use that as a deflocculant, but I don't have experience with that at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So, do you have sodium silicate though?
I'll have to look.
Okay.
I have a lot of random small bags of things, so yeah, I'll look.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, we have 7 minutes left. So we have time for another question or maybe two. Yeah, Patsy, go ahead.
Does anybody know what Darvan 7 is in, British language? I've just been looking on my phone for it, and all the suppliers are in America.
Yeah, so it's a sodium polymethacrylate, and I'm going to type it out.
Yeah.
In the chat.
Thanks.
So that's the chemical name for Darvan. Darvan is just a brand from Vanderbilt Minerals. So if you can get a substance that is similar to that. It could just be polyacrylate without the meth. I've seen that as well. There's another material called Dispex, and I'm pretty sure that it's in Australia, but it might also be in South America, and so it could be in the UK as well. Dispex. But you're looking for a dispersant. It could be called a dispersant or a deflocculant. And then there's Darvan, let's see, Darvan 811 is another one, which is, sodium polyacrylate. So it's not polymethacrylate. Yeah, so there's, if you can find something that is like sodium polyacrylate, something along those lines.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll have a look. Thanks.
Are you in my Facebook group or?
No,
are you
I
on
don't Facebook.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just wondering if I could find out. I might
Email me.
pose a question. Yeah, I could email you.
Find that information.
Yeah, because there's over 3,000 people in there and a lot of people in the UK. So someone might have the like the brand name that you would want to be looking for. So
Okay.
I'll see what I can do. And I don't know if you can you email me and then I can just reply back to you.
Yes.
Okay.
Do I have your email? Yes.
Probably. Yeah. So
Okay.
like the email that you got about this
Yeah, it's from
webinar, you can just
That's
reply to
from you.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, and I have time for one more question if anyone has any last things that they want to say. Is it similar to sodium silicate? Yeah, so sodium silicate is another deflocculant, and sodium is the deflocculating ingredient. So sodium silicate can be used as a deflocculant. The reason I use Darvan over sodium silicate is because I found that Darvan is just a little more forgiving, so it's harder to ruin your glaze or your clay body with Darvan. Because what I found, I did a whole bunch of tests where I was deflocculating with sodium silicate and I was deflocculating with Darvan. And I tried like the sodium silicate, it had a very small window for where it was working. So it was like I was adding it, it wasn't deflocculating. And then it got to the, one more drop and it was deflocculated, and then one more drop just put it over the edge. And so it was just really hard to kind of get it right. Whereas with Darvan, I just kept adding like teaspoon after teaspoon after teaspoon. And I was trying to get it to fail because I wanted to see how much Darvan I could add before it would fail. And I got to the point where I was like just watching my dollars go down the drain. I kept adding more and more Darvan, which isn't cheap, and I couldn't get the glaze to over deflocculate. So it's just, yeah, Darvan is just more user friendly, and so that's what I recommend. But if you can't get Darvan, yes, you can use sodium silicate and it works the same, but you just have to be really careful with how much you're adding, and adding a very, very small amount at a time. And make sure that you're mixing really, really well with a high-speed mixer before you add more, so you can make sure that it gets well incorporated into the glaze or the clay or whatever. So, yeah. If anyone has anything else that they want to say, I'm happy to answer another question. It's 10:58 a.m. here, but this has been really fun. Next Friday, it's Good Friday, but I am going to do this again next Friday. So I'm just hoping like some people that haven't been able to come because they're working or whatever, maybe they'll have the day off. And I'm just sitting at home, so I'm happy to be here on a holiday or any day really. So. So you guys will all be invited to join me again next Friday. And I hope you all have a great weekend and week, and that you're taking good care of yourselves and not getting too squirrely sitting inside your homes, and that you can get out for walks and do all the things to keep ourselves sane during these crazy times. So
I was interested that I read your little thing that you play different instruments and to keep yourself entertained. I thought, cool.
Yeah, I play the guitar, and I've been learning the mandolin and the ukulele, and I love to sing. I sing in a choir. So we've been having choir. Our choir has been meeting on Zoom, but because there's a lag between, like when I speak, there's a couple seconds before you hear, and so it's really hard to sing together, but we tried it anyways, and we were all laughing. So that was pretty fun. But,
yes.
Yeah,
That's
we're making do.
Entertaining.
Yeah. So thank you all so much, and I hope to see you next week.
Happy pottering.
Happy pottering. Thanks, Wendy.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.